Hey there, Super Geeks. Ryan Schumacher here for the Geek Out video on week 7. We were talking about libertarianism versus compatibilism. Here, I want to talk about the question, can we be morally responsible, even if outcomes are determined? This may have come up on the last one. It's an important question, but I leaned heavily on the compatibilistic understanding. And the question, can we be morally responsible? And indeed, it can follow up, can we be morally held to account, even if outcomes are determined, even if there is no other possibility than to do what God has set out? So I wanted to get at this question, and there's a card here. There's a few images. I'll reveal where they're from, but maybe towards the end, but maybe you'll get it. But the Queen of Diamonds, sort of an important image here for the analogy. So on the topic of compatibilism and moral responsibility. So one of the classic questions that libertarian freedom advocates ask that of those who don't hold a libertarian model is, if there is no alternate possibility, if you can do nothing other than what has been determined for you to do, then how could you possibly be morally responsible for it? This is sometimes known as the principle of alternate possibilities. So the principle of alternate possibilities is thought of as the fundamental thing that underlies the theory of choice. So, we are free if we have the principle of alternate possibilities, and if we are free, we are able, then we are also responsible. We can be held to account. We are accountable if we are able, if we're able, right? And so the compatibilistic model sort of denies the principle of alternative possibilities. It says, not really. Like, we can still freely choose, and yet at the same time, the outcome can be determined. And so we went over how that could be in the last one. And then the follow-up question is, well, then how could we possibly be held responsible? Philosopher Harry Frankfurt came up with a clever analogy illustrating the idea of the principle of alternate possibilities being the only way that we could understand human moral responsibility to be false. He came up with a story that says, in fact, it can be simultaneously true that we act of our own free wills, or free choice, to be more accurate. We make a free choice, yet there is no possibility it could have turned out any other way, and we can be morally responsible. And it goes like this. Is related by David Hunt in Divine Foreknowledge 4 Views. So David Hunt, writes, Black wishes to see Smith dead, and he knows that Jones shares this wish, and thinks that it is unlikely, thinks that it is likely that Jones will act on this wish. Unwilling to take any chances, though, Black deploys a science fiction device capable of monitoring or controlling a person's thoughts, and programs it to monitor Jones's intentions with respect to murdering Smith. If Jones is not going to murder Smith, then the device intervenes to ensure Jones does, in fact, murder Smith. But if the device indicates that Jones is going to murder Smith on his own, the device doesn't intervene. As it turns out, Jones goes ahead and murders Smith on his own. Nothing happens to trigger the device's intervention. And you can see it right there, Raymond Shaw from the movie The Manchurian Candidate. So here's the interesting question. Could Jones have done otherwise? No. This is going to turn out one of one way. Smith was going to be dead. Now, how it happened was going to be one of two ways. Either Jones was going to do it on his own, or the device was going to kick in, and Jones was going to do it because the device essentially forced Jones to kill Smith. In this scenario, Jones did, in fact, kill Smith of his own free will. So, it is simultaneously possible that there is no alternate possibility. Smith was ended up dead either way, but the action is indeed freely chosen, and the agent is morally culpable for the action, and that's what's important. The Frankfurt analogy talks about how there can be differences in moral culpability even if the outcome is determined. And so in this case, the outcome is determined, Smith's dead. The action is freely chosen by Jones, though, and therefore, Jones is morally culpable. Jones is acting on Jones's desires. So think back yet to Yahweh and the Assyrians. There is no alternate possibility. Yahweh says he is wielding the Assyrians against Judah. But the desires of their hearts are merely being expressed. Assyria wanted to conquer the whole world. That's Assyria. You think Assyria was going to stop at the northern kingdom of Israel after going through Syria? No, they were going for Judah next. So there was no alternate possibility here. The Assyrians were going to attack. But they had those sinful desires. Just because in some instances God lets them act out some of it, remember they were prevented from destroying them. God allows the Assyrians to act sometimes, removing the hand of restraint. But in other times restrains that. Underlying, those sinful desires are still there. And the judgment of God fell upon them because of the desire of their hearts, not for what they did to Israel, but for the desires of their hearts, the sinful desires. We might not think that's fair, but sorry, sinful desires are sinful desires. And so we are held to account for our attitudes and our heart, just as much as we are accountable for our actions. I hate to break it to you, and this is very sobering for me, trust me. But you can sin in thought. It is possible. Happens all the time. Our sinful natures are what we are held to account for, whether or not we acted it out. So, you have, even in the Sermon on the Mount, it's very interesting. You have Jesus say that, you've heard it say, do not murder, but I say, don't be angry. You've heard it say, do not commit adultery. I say, do not lust. It's the underlying attitude. Jesus one-ups the law and says, it's actually the heart that ends up mattering. And that's what you're held to account for. And so here, the Assyrians are held to account for the desires of their hearts, even if the action was allowed for a particular purpose, which is the discipline of Israel, and they couldn't have done anything else. So hopefully this analogy might help show more how there can be no alternate possibilities. An outcome can be determined and yet still have moral culpability. So interested in any of your thoughts and comments, but as always, thanks for watching and God bless.